Hi guys, welcome to Bella Chats. I'm Isabelle Bouchard, and this is a show where we interview people in the community on just about everything. Our second guest this morning is Greg Negel. How are you, Greg?
I'm doing very good. Thanks for having me in.
Greg is the athletic trainer for Rockbridge High School. So Greg, just take us through how you prepare for a first football game or football game night.
Okay, well, for a home night, school's out at 4:05, so the guys will go down. They'll have a little pregame meal, which is amazing. You know, the parents put that on. They're done with that usually around 4:30. We'll be in the athletic training room prepping for taping and stretching and some last-minute rehab treatments to take place to prep our guys before they go out. At 5:45, 5:50, they go out on the field for early outs, is what they call it. And from that point, you know, you're doing last-minute adjustments, whether it be equipment or taping or wrapping or with your ace wraps, and just any little last-second preparations that you need. And then of course, from 6 to 7 is mainly pregame warm-ups. At that point, you're just kind of putting out fires if anything new happens. And then from 7 o'clock from kickoff on, it's more of a reactive job from that point. But up until that point, everything is prep, and taping and hot packs and some electric stim on some muscle strains that we have, and just trying to prep everyone as well as we can before that kickoff. And then once 7 o'clock arrives, the kickoff, and then you get into more of a reactive mode, and you've done most of your work as an athletic trainer at that point, and you hope to be kind of just left alone and enjoy a great football game and enjoy a Rockbridge win. But every now and then, you know, you have the injuries that we're there for and respond to, and anything from orthopedic to, you know, whatever you're going to see with full contact, that you see just a little bit of everything over time.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So what's something that athletes take lightly, like an injury that you wish they would take more seriously?
You know, I think there's a couple different things. I think hamstring strains, I think, are taken for granted a lot of times. It's a muscle strain. It's a simple muscle strain, but the hamstrings are always trying to keep up with the quads. And we've been fortunate enough to have that injury kind of leave us alone, if you will, for the last year or two. I think our strength and conditioning program has been really good with Coach Fadley, and we've identified some areas where we can improve with hamstrings. So I think from a preventative standpoint, we've really been real good with hamstring injuries. And the other one is head injuries. And it used to be the case that head injuries were taken pretty lightly, and almost in a humorous way, because the brain makes us respond in ways that aren't typical, and sometimes that's kind of a funny thing, but you only have one brain, and thankfully we've kind of come full circle on that, and we're taking care of our athletes with concussions and head injuries in a more conservative way, especially at the high school setting.
So what's the worst case that you've seen in high school?
Well, you've seen some. I've seen some bad injuries, but orthopedically, probably the tibia and the fibula fracture, the tib-fib fracture, at the same time. Athletes will get, from time to time, their foot caught in the turf. Someone will land on their leg, and at that point, the tibia, the big bone of the lower leg, and the fibula, the smaller bone of the lower leg, break at the same time in the same area of the leg, and it's very painful, as you can imagine, very graphic, and for the athletic trainer, it just at that point becomes a splinting effort to make sure that we don't make anything worse, because something like that involves an orthopedic surgeon that night or the next morning, and so it's a pretty serious deal, a pretty traumatic deal. And unfortunately, we've seen one of those out here, and it's you never want to see a serious injury with anyone, and that's one that I can think of immediately that caused a lot of immediate trauma. We've had others that have been real serious, but the immediate handling of such was not as apparent. You have to, some of these injuries, you have to just kind of be almost like an FBI, you know, agent. You just kind of stay on it and keep researching, and you'll get your diagnosis with the cooperation of the doctors.
So how often do you find players who have concussions or play with concussions?
Well, we hopefully, you know, we don't, as long as our athletes are true to form and typically are honest with their symptoms with us. Hopefully, in an ideal world, we won't have anyone playing with a concussion. But there is always that risk that someone gets their head hit and they've sustained a concussion, a mild traumatic brain injury. You might see it abbreviated MTBI, but where the brain impacts the skull from the inside. That brain is just suspended in cerebral spinal fluid, and if it gets hit hard enough, some of the worst concussions that we see are glancing blows. They don't look like much sometimes on camera, but a glancing blow sometimes, because the brain is just suspended, there's almost a ricochet effect inside the skull, and those concussions seem to have some of the worst symptoms, and those are the ones we look out for and make sure that we never send an athlete back to the field with symptoms. And the most common symptom is a headache, but we track 22 different symptoms to make sure that all those are clear, and then we don't want any athletes going back on the field with any symptoms at all. So with the new state law enacted last year, it doesn't change a whole lot of what we do. We had this protocol in place, but we make sure athletes are symptom-free for 24 hours, and then we take them through a 5-day progression because youth athletes, you have to be very conservative. The brain's still developing. The frontal bones and temporal bones of the skull are still developing, so we got to be really conservative with those guys.
Right. Now, there's also a lot of talk about player-enhanced drugs in the professional area of sports. So how does that carry over into high school? Performance enhancement drugs are a big thing in sports, and you see them at high levels of sports. You see them at collegiate levels of sports, and if you walk through a locker room of any high school, I would argue that you're probably going to see some jugs of supplements sitting in the locker rooms, and most of those are protein supplements. But you got to look out for a lot of those, because the problem with the supplements are that they're not regulated by the FDA, and if it's not regulated by the FDA, you don't know exactly what's in it or in what amount, and you can get in trouble with things like ephedrine and some other central nervous system stimulants. You don't want your athletes having those things in their systems to compound any negative effects that you might get from just competition by itself. And so we encourage just to stay away from the supplements, do things naturally, rest 8 hours of sleep every night, hydrate. The Clear P test, we always somehow get that into almost interview I do, and we're not even talking about hydration, but that's important. And then making sure that we're lifting and doing things, eating right, fueling our bodies the right way, and lifting in an aggressive way to get your goal. And if that doesn't work, then maybe consult someone about a supplement that might be safe. But by and large, we try and do everything natural first, and then have a visit about supplements. In an ideal world, that's the way it would work before you just go out and start experimenting with things. There's no substitute for good hard work. Right, okay, well, that's all I have for you, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me in. Okay. All right.
And stay tuned for next time, guys, on Bella Chats. Thank you.
All right.